Camino Lion Media presents Business First.
Hi all, and welcome to a new episode of Business First with Sonia Aline. I am your host, and today we are going to talk about politics. Yes, politics. That can be difficult. It can be a touchy subject, but it's one that's actually not discussed enough, except outside of national elections. And the guest we have today is really going to talk about the importance of why our political conversations and political engagement needs to be a bigger part of how we do business and how we get the things that we need done in business. What's interesting is, and I don't think that they needed to do a study for this, but Johns Hopkins University did a study in 2018, and it revealed that many Americans don't have an understanding of our political process. Like I said, I don't think they needed a study for that. I think we understand that. And I'm here in New York, and so is our guest. And so also, interestingly enough, when we talk about the lack of engagement politically, the mayoral election of 2017, 21.7% of registered voters voted. And when you think about the type of city that New York is, the amount of people that we have here, the diversity that we have here, the industries that are based here in New York City, that only 21.7% of registered voters voted. That's a problem if we're talking about engagement and relying on a political system to be able to move forward agendas that's going to make living better for us, make business better for us. So I'm excited today to welcome to the mic and to our audience, Assemblywoman Latrice Walker in New York. Welcome, Latrice.
So yes, from the beautiful borough of Brooklyn, the communities that I represent include Brownsville, Ocean Hill, Brownsville, Bed-Stuy, East Flatbush, Crown Heights, Cypress Hills, and East New York. And in just this 2021 session, I was the chair of the Election Law Committee. And I'm very proud to serve in this capacity. It's so funny, like when I first became named as the chair, I just kept saying, wow, chair of election law? Like, I don't know what to expect here, but I certainly did not expect it, this committee to be the committee of most of the hot topics of not just people who are sort of politicals, but just sort of everyday New Yorkers who are concerned and are involved in just life. And so, after we've seen what took place this year, we have ranked choice voting. It was the first time that folk had an opportunity to vote for not just one candidate, but up to 5 candidates. And in the middle of a pandemic, we had an opportunity to educate all of the voters with respect to this new process. And then it's only for municipal elections. Like we can, as we continue our conversation, we can go into some of those, but it's only for municipal elections. And then next year we have state elections. And then we're going to go back to those very same voters, particularly those in New York City, to say, forget everything we taught you last year about voting, ranked choice voting, because now we got to go back to the process that we used to use. And then because this is an election year, in 2023, we're going to have municipal elections again for those city council seats. And so we're going to say, okay, now go back to ranked choice voting, even though we told you to unlearn all of that last year. And then in 2024, we're going to go right back to those same voters again and say, there's no more ranked choice voting. You know what I mean? And so this really just adds to voter confusion. I don't know if what level of just sort of economic stressors will be, because we'll need resources in order to do this education and re-education and miseducation. And so, we're in for a real treat. But we had some really amazing things that we had an opportunity to do, including early voting and providing resources for early voting sites. We passed automatic voter registration. So when people go into certain agencies, HRA, NYCHA, DMV, Department of Health, that they will be automatically electronically register to vote. So we are trying our best to make voting easy and accessible and efficient. We did electronic poll books. And so it has been an amazing, amazing plight, but it also has some very serious pitfalls with all of the discrepancies of the Board of Elections here in the city of New York, but also, just as we address the concerns, recommendations, and comments of and about Board of Elections all across the state of New York.
So as you mentioned, it has been an interesting year politically, in terms of news. COVID obviously has taken up a lot of our attention, as well as all of the social unrest. I know that you have been involved in every aspect of living in New York City, from fair housing, domestic violence, gun violence. How are you able to the citizens of New York to feel that voting is something important? There's a lot of apathy, there's distrust, there's mistrust. What is it that, our political system can do, and those involved in it, to get people to understand that, we really can't do this unless people are engaged?
Well, I guess it's different scenarios for different groups, right? So one of the things that I stress a lot is the fact that when I got elected, I was told that 25,000 people were returning home from the upstate criminal justice system to my district. And those 25,000 people had been disenfranchised based on their incarceration, but based on initially an executive order of the governor. And now we've signed it, and we've passed the bill and the governor signed it into law. People who are presently on parole are able to register to vote and to vote, right? And so when folk come home, they got regular issues like, where can I find housing? How can I get access to health care? Where are my kids going to school? How can I get a job? And all of those things are just sort of intricately intertwined into our civil society. And so while there is an opportunity to get people to vote, and we call that part of this industry the politics or the political arm, but then there's also the policy arm as well, right? And so how do you effectuate change? How do you raise up your voice? What is important about electing someone that espouses the same ideals that you have, and you know that once they get into these seats, they're going to remain tried and true to those issues. And so one of the things that I love the most about, being an assemblywoman is that I get to represent the neighborhood that I was born and raised in. And so this is where I played Skelly. It's where I played Double Dutch, and it's where I grew up in NYCHA developments. It's where I was educated. I live across the street from where I went to first grade, and across the street from that is where I went to middle school. And so there's so many dynamics about the community that people are just like, we want Latrice in office because we know she knows, because she was here going through those things with me. And so you have to have some level of faith in the abilities and in the integrity of the person that you are electing. And so when we have other conversations, it's like, the price of cigarettes, everybody complain about how expensive they are. But that's politics, because those are taxes. The price of gas and all of those other things, which are sort of everyday pocketbook issues, whether or not, your unemployment is going to be received. We just went through a pandemic, getting access to masks, getting access to sanitizer, and all the other resources that everyone needs, laptops for your kids. Politics and policy and civics affects everything that we do each and every day of our lives. And quite frankly, if a no vote is still a vote, instead of you voting, right, you're now allowing other people to have their say over those everyday civics that involves you and involves your family and your community. And so either you're going to choose to be engaged in it or you're not. And politics is a verb, right? It's like, it's not something that we know, it's something that we do. And you're right, people are very apathetic about it because, quite frankly, government has used, certain communities, particularly communities of color, as guinea pigs for these new initiatives. And they come out with a new initiative every other week, every other month. And when things don't go wrong, then they just come back and they say, oops, and then come back with another one. And so you're right, people really just don't trust the process. But we at this point can no longer, we've seen what it looks like when we just throw tomatoes at the TV. And we have seen what happens when we actually get involved and get engaged. We get things done. Not only did we just come off of having the first Black man as the president of the United States, we had a huge hiccup, regurgitation for a couple of years, but then we came back and elected the first Black woman as vice president, the first woman, period, right? And so we know the power of the vote. We have seen it time and time again. Every now and then we get a little bit off kilter because we get a little disengaged and a little, disenchanted with what we see happening politically. But no matter what, we know the power of our vote because we've seen it before. We've done it before. We've affected change before, and we know that we can do it again. And so hopefully people just remain, engaged.
I'm glad you brought up the last few elections, because on a national level, people can get engaged when there's enough outrage, when there's enough frustration, or in the case of President Barack Obama, inspiration, feeling like, yes, we can, like this is a possibility for us to make history. And so people were engaged and they were, they really wanted to be a part of a movement. They really wanted to change where we were. Why is it? And is it because people really don't understand? And I like what you said, that politics is not something that is, it's something that we do. Is it because on a local level, we don't find that level of engagement because people don't understand what you just laid out, that policy, politics, and civics, they govern everything that we do every day?
So I believe that there is a certain quasi celebrity to national politics.
Okay.
And so, and part of that is fed by the media or national media, and so when we turn on our TV, we see the president, we see our members of Congress, but we very rarely see our local elected officials because, quite frankly, mainstream media just doesn't view those levels of elected officials as sexy. It's not titillating, right? And so we don't get a chance to see it and we don't really get a chance to engage with local folk about it because they're just not showing it. And maybe some of it is purposeful. Maybe it's not. Who knows? I believe that there is at least some level of conspiracy to it. The New York State budget, there's billions and billions of dollars that get spent each and every year. And it's like, no matter what happens, this money is going to go out the door. It's going to go into the community, into the streets, into big business, into our schools. And it's like, who's getting these contracts? Okay. And and part of it has to do with the fact that as long as we keep folk distracted, I just started going back into the Federalist Papers and factions. And as long as you keep the masses concentrated over here, they're not going to be looking at all of these dynamics that's taking place each and every day, right? Yeah. And so we'll talk about policing from a national perspective, but you can't get the George Floyd bill passed in Washington, D.C., but we just passed one in the state of New York. But you're not even focusing on that because the media is going to beat up bail reform so bad that they're going to have you thinking we don't need criminal justice reform in our communities and to undo the things that were already done, because again, the media is being controlled by people who want us to believe what they want us to believe. Or even we're looking at HR 1 and why we can't get the John Lewis Voting Rights Act off the ground. When there's a John Lewis Voting Rights Act, which I sponsor along with my Senate partner, Senator Zelnor Myrie, right here in the state of New York that we can get that done, and to be able to have, even if we don't have it on a federal level, we could have it right here in the state of New York to be able to get those protections locally. But again, all of those things aren't titillating. And so, which is why it's so important for local media outlets like yourself, who has their ear to the ground and their fingers on the pulse of the community, to really get to those individuals who, without your support and without these mediums, we would never be able to gain access to that ear. And so I want to honor you and thank all your listeners for what you contribute to the body politic.
Well, I'm thanking you for coming on, because when I spoke to Nadine, your communications director, and she suggested the idea, it totally made sense. Right. And what we were talking about is that there are reasons for communities in this country, like Atlanta, that do well. And so if we bring it back to business, right, there are reasons why these communities do really well. It's because these communities understand the importance of that level of engagement. And so when we look at a city like New York that has great diversity, large Black and brown populations, explain the importance of this connection between being engaged in politics and being able to have your businesses succeed the way, any business owner would like their business to succeed.
Wow. So I think that conversation is that a post-COVID conversation or a pre-COVID conversation? Because a lot of those dynamics, really do play itself out in here as well.
Well, I would imagine that, we understand that there were challenges, a lot of challenges, and many of them that you laid out before COVID. Now, of course, there's been money and there's been a lot of, discussion about like who gets the money and how people have gotten money and Black businesses not being prepared or set up properly to be able to access the money, which again goes back to information. But for people who are today thinking about how I need to move my business forward, and you may be talking to people who were never thinking about, getting involved in local politics, or thinking that, all politicians are the same. I don't need to, I'm just trying to make make this business work for my family and for me. What message do we give them about why this is really important, why engagement, why you have to be involved, why you have to take the time, 100 other things that you've got to manage that are connected to survival, why this is also very much connected to your survival in the city.
So in a post-COVID world, right, we have the minority and women-owned business enterprises and what that looks like, and highlighting Black and women-owned businesses or communities, businesses of people who are indigenous to communities of color, and what that world looks like with all of its intricate either hurdles or victories. And then in a post-COVID world where, many of our businesses, particularly here in the state of New York, were forced to shut down. People were at home and trying to work from home. And what does that look like now in terms of trying to get back to things and that has some level of normalcy? So just the other day in the assembly, we announced that we just did the COVID-19 pandemic small business recovery grant program. And in this particular grant program, it's $800 million that was secured for small business access for businesses that are just really trying to survive. And we know that, this funding is critical. And again, it's grant money. We did see that there were PPE loans that were granted, which were federal loans in nature. Some businesses had access to it. Some found it hard to be able to get through, particularly our nonprofit organizations.
Right.
And then, and so at the end of the day, the state had to do something to be able to provide some level of recourse for our businesses to be able to snap back. Like, as we all hear, small business is the lifeblood of our economy, particularly our local economies, because local businesses hire locally, and generally speaking, they're locally owned as well. And so, it is a huge source of Black wealth and wealth in our communities of color. So particularly when we are engaging about politics, you always want to make sure that you are engaged and involved in these conversations. And so when there are town halls that discusses these things, particularly with senators. I know Senator Schumer here in New York does a number of teletown halls, as well as Congresswoman Clark and Congressman Jeffries, and they partner with their local partners on many of these calls. You should get on those calls, because that's when you get a chance to ask the questions that are necessary based on your personal experiences or the experiences of your colleagues, and to be able to get a response from, where the rubber meets the road, as opposed to going to some low-level bureaucrat that may have gotten this information, 14 times removed by the time they get this conversation to you. And so again, which is why, civics is very important. Knowing who your elected officials are, knowing their telephone numbers and how to get in contact with them, whether it's through email or social media. And please follow me at The Real Latrice Walker on Instagram and Facebook and Twitter. And we're all watching what our social media streams are like. Our offices are ready and available to meet and answer phone calls, etc. And that's really just how you'll be able to move the needle just a little bit more each day in order to get the things that you need for your small businesses to your business.
How do you feel about the engagement? Do you feel that people could do more? Would you you and your colleagues like to hear more from people? Would you like to see that there's this a higher level of engagement, or the things that are there things that people are doing? You mentioned that they should go on to these teletown halls, that they should be connected enough so that they know, that they're getting the right information for what they need. What are you seeing, or what do you all discuss when you talk about engagement levels?
So I think it's just, different strokes for different folks, right? Mm-hmm. We just passed the Marijuana Regularization and Taxation Act for New York State. Mm-hmm. And so if you are a small business who wants to be engaged as a player and a participant in this new legalized industry, then, you want to be engaged in that portion of the conversation. A lot of times, I wasn't necessarily able to talk to, just a bunch of regular, dudes from the block about, marijuana legalization. But now when I walk by and they out in the streets and they're like smoking their blunt, and I'm like, yo, ain't you glad that we passed that bill? And they're like, yeah, right? And so now here I get a chance to connect. And sometimes I'm like, maybe I shouldn't even go over there. But I'm just like, why not? Because they have to understand it's politics that did that, right? And so, and why it's important for them to also recognize that when you were doing this 10 years ago and under stop and frisk, the police department was going into your pockets and arresting you for a blunt, a joint, whatever. Now you got a record, you can't get a job, you can't go to school. Now all of that stuff has been wiped clean, and you need to know that. In addition to that, you also need to know that there are set-asides within this particular legislation that allows for people who were over-criminalized and affected unfairly by this industry to participate in a real way. And the only way that they'll be able to figure those things out is to be able to have those conversations. And so you can talk to them about that. Then there's faith-based initiatives. As you're going into your, speaking to the pastors, how do they gain access to some of their services that they need, since their churches have been shut down for so long? There's still some churches who have not rebounded and opened up their doors. And so what does that mean with their bills, Con Edison, et cetera, or families at home when their kids don't have tablets or internet, or, they can't get into the Zoom, and what that conversation is like. And so really you just have to meet folk where they are. I would love for us to be able to get a lot more engagement from the community at large. But you know what? Sometimes if something is not like real and ready and right in your face, you kind of remain a little disconnected from it. Half of the time, I don't like talking about, talking all the time, but I know that, I have to, because, this is, if I don't, then who's going to do it?
So you've been in office for roughly 6 years in the role of assembly member. What is it that has surprised you, and what have you learned in the last 6 years?
What has surprised? Well, COVID surprised me. I never could have prepared for that.
I surprised all of us.
Oh my goodness!
In so many ways.
In so many ways. But you know what I also appreciated about it? It created an atmosphere where families had an opportunity to just reconnect and re-engage with one another. Like I'm sitting here, my daughter has swim lessons today. Typically, you know, I'd have to go up to Albany a couple of days a week. And, you know, my network, I have a super duper mom, you know, was able to hold things down. But, you know, I had a chance to kind of like, you know, be home and just be like, you know, hey, like, you know, what's up? I'm your mom. Like, and I thought that was beautiful. And I got to learn, like, you know, how to add and subtract mixed fractions with, you know, improper fractions. Like
you're good.
All of that stuff. It's just, you know, who knew? Who knew? And that surprised me, but it was a blessing, you know, in disguise. With politics, of course, every day is a different day. And so there's no day that's typical. I realized if I didn't do this, I wouldn't know what it was, what I'd be doing. I mean, I am an attorney by training.
Right.
Yeah. And so there's still a lot of, you know, a lot of the same, you know, pieces at play here with respect to now, instead of, you know, interpreting or analyzing the law, you get a chance to make laws or them both, and which I think is like, you know, being a little girl from the projects, like who would have ever thought that? Like that surprised me.
Yeah.
But you know, it's a labor of love, and it's the one job where folk like kick your butt and like tell you off, curse you out, tell you all the 11 million things that you're not doing and how you're the worst things in sliced bread. But it's a one job that every 2 years you keep going back, fighting for more, you know, continue with my ass, and I'll continue to fight like hell. And I'll do so because the greater good is really what all of this is about. And so, you know, politics is an amazing sport, and I encourage more people to really get involved in it.
If someone were to ask you, like, who is Latrice Walker, right? Particularly when you think about what type of work politics is, right? Because you get way more criticism than you ever get praise. And as an attorney, you could probably make a lot more money if you had focused on law, corporate law, or even if you were doing something else with your law degree. What is it about you and who you are that you're willing to fight and you're willing to stay in the fight to see things change?
Well, I think that there's a certain a level of grit that my community has really taught me. That really just allows me to just be real, right? Like, it's easy to be myself because it's me and I'm me. And I don't have to think about, you know, what to say, how to say, because I just do and say the things that, you know, come naturally for me. And so the type of person that I am is what you see is what you get. You know, if there's ever a point in time or in life that I can't look myself in the mirror, then I'm doing the wrong thing. I'm in the wrong profession. I might as well go back and do something else. When it comes to the law, I still love the law. I was an entertainment lawyer working for some great folk. I worked under the tutelage of L. Lundell McMillan, who was like, you know, stellar in this industry. And I think that there's still an opportunity to go back and do that at some point in life. Again, the law is my first love. I don't want to die in this position. Like, I want to be able to have succession leadership so that the next generation of leaders who's coming up behind me will be able to take everything it is that I've done and really just make it more magnanimous. And so, you know, that's just me. I'm a little girl from Saratoga Avenue in Brooklyn.
And so what would you say to anyone listening who might maybe before this podcast was just like politics, but is either inspired by the work that you're doing, inspired by the ability to make changes through politics? Like, what would you advise for someone to
We have an initiative that I'm trying now. And so I got this acronym from an amazing bishop. It's called Women Organizing, Mobilizing, and Building. And so, you know, it thinks about how we're giving birth to something, or this is a rebirthing. And so I encourage folks to help us and, you know, really get that off the ground. And then we got the bomb, right? And That's brothers organizing, mobilizing, and building. And really right now, we have to be in an organizing mode. Our communities are not just being gentrified, but so are our politics. And we have to be organized and we have to be mobilized in that spirit of John Lewis and everything that happened in the civil rights movement has to be re-energized, and we have to participate in it in a great deal.
Just let us know how we can connect with WOMB and BOMB and how we can follow you.
So again, my social media handle is The Real Latrice Walker.
Okay.
And my email address is walkerl@nyassembly.gov.
Okay. All righty. Thank you so much for taking time out. I know it was a busy day for you. We appreciate all of your expertise and your passion and your fight for all the things that you're doing in New York City. Thank you for being a guest on our show.
Thank you for having me, and I look forward to coming back. This has been great.
Business First is hosted and produced by Sonia Aline. Edited by Ken Johnson. Executive producers, Ken Johnson. Find the Business First Podcast on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, TuneIn, or wherever you get your podcasts. The Business First Podcast is a Mean Old Line Media production.